So picture this. You're sitting there, maybe on a Sunday afternoon, and you open up your investment app, the one you downloaded 18 months ago because you read somewhere that you're supposed to be investing, and you see your balance, and it's like $4,200, and you think, okay, that's not nothing. I've been putting money in every month. I've been doing the responsible thing. I haven't touched it. And yet somehow, looking at that number, you feel almost nothing. No excitement, no sense of progress. Just this vague, hollow feeling like, is this even working? Should I be doing something else? Maybe I picked the wrong funds. Maybe I started too late. Maybe the whole thing is just a slow, boring, pointless exercise in delayed gratification that never actually arrives. And here's the thing. My name is Rick, and I spend probably an embarrassing amount of time thinking about compounding and wealth psychology and why the single most powerful financial force in human history manages to feel completely invisible to almost everyone who's actually experiencing it. I've read the studies, I've run the numbers obsessively on spreadsheets at weird hours of the night, and I still had a moment early on where I genuinely questioned whether any of it was real, whether the whole just invest and wait thing was some kind of elaborate financial folklore passed down by people who got lucky and then built a mythology around their timing. But what I eventually figured out, and what I want to walk you through today, is that compounding doesn't fail most people. The timeline fails most people. There is a specific, almost mathematical moment when compounding stops feeling like patience and starts feeling like power. And if you don't know where that moment is, if you don't know what to look for, you will almost certainly give up right before it arrives, which would be, honestly, one of the most expensive mistakes a person can make. So let's talk about it. Let's go back to that $4,200 balance. You've been investing, let's say, $300 a month. 12 months, maybe 18, and your account has grown, sure, but it's grown the way a plant grows when you're watching it, which is to say, you can't actually see it happening in real time. You just kind of check on it, feel underwhelmed, and walk away. Here's what's actually going on mathematically and why it feels so anticlimactic. In the early stages of compounding, the vast majority of your account growth comes from your contributions, the money you're manually putting in, not from the compounding itself. If you invest $300 a month for a year at a 10% annual return, you've put in $3,600. The market has added maybe a couple $100 on top of that. You look at your balance and go, cool, I made $200. And that's technically true, but it's also completely beside the point. Think of it like this. Imagine you're building a snowball at the top of a hill. In the beginning, you're doing all the work. You're packing the snow with your hands, rolling it, shaping it. The hill isn't doing anything yet. The ball is small, your hands are cold, and you're wondering why anyone told you this was a good idea. But the snowball is growing. Slowly, imperceptibly, it is growing. And at some point, it gets just large enough that when it starts rolling, the hill takes over. And then you're not doing the work anymore. The physics are doing the work. You just have to not stop it. The problem is that nobody tells you exactly how long you have to stand there packing snow before the hill takes over. And so most people, and I mean the overwhelming majority of people who start investing, quit during the packing phase. They get bored. They get impatient. They see a friend making money flipping houses, or they read about someone turning $10,000 into $200,000 on some stock, and they think, this slow, boring thing I'm doing can't possibly compete with that. So they stop, or they cash out, or they just let the contributions slide for a few months, then a year, then indefinitely. And here's the brutal irony. They quit right before the hill starts to matter. Okay, let's actually look at this, because I think seeing the real math is the thing that changes people's minds. Not hearing that compounding is powerful, everyone's heard that. Seeing when it becomes powerful, because there's a specific inflection point, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Let's take someone, let's call her Maya, who starts investing $500 a month at age 25 into a broad index fund averaging about 10% annually. Pretty standard setup, nothing exotic. In year one, Maya's put in $6,000. Her account is worth maybe $6,300. The market contributed $300. Cool. Underwhelming. By year 5, she's contributed $30,000 total. Her account is worth roughly $38,000. The market has added about $8,000 on top of her contributions. That's more meaningful, but she's still doing most of the heavy lifting herself. By year 10, she's contributed $60,000. Her account is worth about $95,000. Now we're talking, the market has added $35,000 that Maya didn't have to work for. That's starting to feel real. But here's where it gets genuinely wild. By year 20, Maya has contributed $120,000 total. Her account is worth approximately $340,000, which means the market, compound growth, reinvested returns, time, has generated over $220,000 that Maya never personally earned or saved. She contributed $1, and compounding gave her back nearly $3. And by year 30, Maya has put in $180,000. Her account is worth something like $986,000, essentially $1 million. She personally saved $180,000. Compounding created over $800,000. Let that land for a second. Over $800,000 that she didn't earn, didn't save, didn't hustle for, just generated by time, by patience, by leaving things alone and not doing anything clever or complicated. Now here's the question I want you to sit with. At what point in that journey did compounding become the primary engine of Maya's wealth? When did the hill take over from her hands? The answer, roughly, is somewhere around year 12 to 15. That's when Maya's annual returns from growth start to exceed her annual contributions. That's the moment. That's the inflection point nobody puts on a poster. You're working hard, putting money in, feeling slightly bored and slightly anxious, and then quietly, without fanfare, the machine flips. And instead of you feeding compounding, compounding starts feeding you. I want to describe what this inflection point looks like from the inside because I think it's different from what people expect. Most people imagine that when compounding kicks in, they'll feel it, like there'll be some visible jump. Some morning they'll wake up and their account will have done something dramatic overnight. But that's not how it works. It's more like you gradually realize that your account is doing things you didn't do. You had a month where you were tight on cash and skipped your contribution, and your balance still went up by $800. Or you notice at the end of the year that your portfolio returned $12,000 and you only contributed $6,000, meaning the market gave you more than you gave it. And you think, when did that start happening? That's the wealth machine turning on. It's not a dramatic moment. It's a quiet realization that the equation has flipped. And once it flips, the trajectory changes in a way that becomes almost hard to believe. Because now your base is large. And a 10% return on a $200,000 portfolio is $20,000, which is more than many people save in an entire year. A 10% return on a $500,000 portfolio is $50,000. The same percentage, radically different outcome, just because the base is bigger. You haven't gotten smarter. The market hasn't gotten more generous. Time just kept doing its thing. This is also why, and I think about this constantly, the worst financial decision most people make isn't picking bad stocks or overpaying for a house or carrying credit card debt, as bad as all of those are. The worst decision is starting late, because every year you delay doesn't just cost you that year's contributions. It costs you everything those contributions would have compounded into. It pushes the inflection point further away, and it shortens the runway on the other side of it, the runway where the machine is running and you're just along for the ride. Here's the part that nobody talks about enough, and honestly, it might be more important than all the math. How do you actually survive the boring years? How do you keep going when your balance feels laughably small relative to what you want your life to look like? Because this is where it actually breaks down for most people. Not in understanding compounding. Everyone kind of understands it. It breaks down in the execution, in the day-to-day, month-to-month, year-to-year act of continuing to invest when you feel absolutely nothing. I think the honest answer is that you have to change what you're measuring. When your balance is $8,000 and your goal is $1 million, measuring your progress in dollars is going to crush your motivation every single time. The gap is too large. The progress is too slow. You will feel mathematically and emotionally like you are failing. But here's what you can measure instead: your contribution rate, your consistency, the number of months you've invested without skipping, the fact that your money is in the market, working, compounding, growing, even when you can't feel it. You're not measuring the snowball. You're measuring the packing. And every month you pack is a month the snowball gets slightly larger, slightly closer to the point where the hill takes over. There's this concept I find genuinely useful, which is the idea of trusting the process rather than tracking the outcome. In the early years of compounding, you have very little control over the outcome. The market does what it does. But you have total control over the process, how much you save, how consistently you invest, whether you stay in the market during downturns. Focus there. Obsess over what you can control and let go of the scoreboard, at least for now. And on that note, downturns. I'd be doing you a disservice if I didn't mention this explicitly. The scariest thing that can happen to someone in the early compounding years is a market crash. Not because the crash itself is so damaging. In the long run, temporary declines are essentially noise. But because a crash can trigger an emotional response that causes you to do the one thing that actually does derail compounding: sell. If you sell during a downturn, you lock in losses, you miss the recovery, and you break the compounding chain. That chain is the whole game. Everything we've talked about, Maya's $800,000 in compounded gains, the inflection point, the machine turning on, all of it depends on staying invested. Not perfectly timed, not cleverly managed, just staying. The boring, quiet, slightly nail-biting act of staying in. Now I want to zoom out for a second because I think there's a version of this conversation that goes beyond pure investment returns. And honestly, I find it even more interesting. Compounding, as a principle, applies to almost everything that builds over time. Skills compound, knowledge compounds, relationships and networks compound, habits compound, and the same inflection point exists in all of them. This moment where what you've been quietly building starts to generate returns that exceed what you're putting in. Think about writing. Someone who writes every day for 2 years has compounded their craft to a point where one piece of content might reach 1,000 people. They didn't write 1,000 pieces, they wrote 500. And the compounded skill, the compounded audience, the compounded reputation did the rest. Or think about learning a language. The first few months feel almost entirely unrewarded. You're putting massive effort in and getting tiny returns. You can barely order coffee. But somewhere around month 8 or 12, the returns start to exceed the effort. Conversations get easier faster than you're studying. Vocabulary expands without deliberate memorization. The compounding of prior knowledge accelerates the acquisition of new knowledge. I'm not saying all this to be philosophical or to dilute the financial message. I'm saying it because I think it reframes the boring early years of anything compounding based. They're not wasted years, they're foundation years. They're the years that make everything else possible. And if you know you're in the foundation years, if you can name what's actually happening, you can tolerate it, maybe even enjoy it a little. Okay, let's land this thing, because I don't want this to just be an interesting video you watch and then forget about while your money sits in a checking account earning 0.01% interest.